Good evening. Welcome to the XENA Star Salon, episode 5. My name is Poonam Arora, and I will be hosting this conversation with a very interesting artist today. His name is Maanas Lal. This show has 4 focus points: citizenship and active citizenship, heritage conservation and revival, alternative arts and alternative education, and not least, imagining a post-COVID world. My guest today, Maanas Lal, is an upcoming artist, although if we keep in mind the company he keeps at various art portals, he is clearly an eminent artist, and we'll talk more about that. Maanas Lal trained as an engineer, but the most remarkable thing about his career is that he had no qualms about leaving that behind and starting out as an artist, a writer, and a musician. Maanas Lal, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Yes, indeed. Since we're talking about art and art revival and art conservation, I would like to begin with art and modernity. This is a particular interest of mine. I see you as a very modern artist, or as struggling with and trying to define modernity in the South Asian context and perhaps worldwide in 2020. Mm-hmm. Would you want to comment on that?
Very interesting question. And in fact, you're right. I think the word struggle is very appropriate, because understanding modernity has been a struggle. And maybe my lens of what is modern differs from several others, and often my audience too. So, but that is the nature of being an artist. And I love calling my art modern art, because I do identify most with the notion of coming up with something new. Although I must say that a lot of my technique, the way I think, is rooted in realism, understanding traditional paintings of the masters. But I think it's time now to work on hybrid kinds of art. And I'm very glad that in the process of trying to redefine modern, I have come up with a couple of techniques of my own where I combine my two great loves of painting and photography, and try and convey my interpretation of modernity to those who see my art, view my art, try and understand it, give it time, and to even those who dislike it. I love critics, and I'm very glad to listen to people who tell me that I'm too modern. That is one of the big compliments I've received in life. So maybe modernity is one of the cornerstones of my life, and so I think that reflects in my work too.
I want to refer back to what is almost a cliche in art, in the art world in India today, that Jawaharlal Nehru was the icon of modernity. And indeed, he took some very bold steps in trying to sculpt, carve out, define, and encourage people to, as you say, struggle with modernity. This was especially interesting because we had just come out from colonial rule. It was a heavy, heavy burden on our consciousness and on our artistic sensibilities. And as a republic, we needed to define ourselves. As a nation, we needed to define ourselves, both for ourselves and in the world. My slight problem, although I agree with most of this praise of Nehruji, is that for some reason, even as he was defining modernity, we've gotten stuck in that moment of modernity. And it is not to lay blame anywhere, but to sort of frame the question for you. So if Nehru was the iconic modernist of independent India, he's been dead some 60 years now. How do you trace the arc between that iconic modernity and what you're doing today?
Well, the iconic modernity which people still talk about, I mean, you call Nehru the maker of modern India. But by that yardstick, I think we are very archaic in terms of how we define modern. So we are clearly stuck in a time which is not modern. And that has happened to a lot of our art forms, not just painting or photography, but I think our writing is also yet to come of age. And, there is this hesitation in stepping out of the box, because I understand that in his own right, Nehruji was a great statesman and he did a lot for the country. But he was the maker of modern India at that time. And now 6 decades later, it's a very different world. And one of us, perhaps in our generation, has to take on that mantle now and be the makers of modern day India. I think, the definition of what is modern has really changed and the world has moved on. And we cannot afford to be stuck in the past. And this is again a question which is close to my heart, because I often, listen to people talk about leaders who are long gone now as being the makers of the modern times. And yes, they have their contributions. And as I said in my first answer, that a lot of us, and most of us actually, take inspiration from what has already happened. There's no harm in learning from the ideas of somebody else and taking them forward. But then you have to reshape them, remold them, and give them the modern context as it is defined today. And I think for that, an open mind and perhaps a liberal mind is very important. And that is where I feel a lot of us have found wanting. We end up holding ourselves back when it comes to taking that little extra risk, or criticizing somebody we have traditionally loved. And that is what I feel about, say, a leader like Nehruji too. That yes, there is a lot to like about him, but there is also a lot to critique. And that is true about every modernist. So the only way to be modern is to have an open mind and to look at everybody just the same, and perhaps bring your own ideas to the table. And I think innovation is where, to an extent, we have lost the plot as a republic. But I'm hopeful that that is going to change.
Completely agree with you. And the risk inherent in being on the cutting edge of modernity, because it's constantly evolving. The moment we get stuck, it's no longer modern. I find that cutting edge in your impulse to mix media. And so your particular hybridity between, let's say, photography and painting, to me is, very, very fascinating. As you know, I'm a film person, so I trace the trajectory from painting to photography to film, and then now, of course, to digital media. And of course, you may not have delved in film, I don't know if you have, but clearly you are in the digital medium as well. So talk to me about the conjunction of photography and painting that you've attempted.
Well, it's actually a story of falling in love with two things and then not being able to decide between them. So what happened to me was that while I was working for 2 years in the IT sector, I used to occasionally turn to painting and photography as those islands of solace which I had in a very busy job. And during that time, I was fortunate enough that some people got in touch with me to do work for them, painting and photography. And I started thinking about taking the risk and maybe quitting my job, because I knew that there's no way I can get good enough at these things unless I give them all my time. And slowly but surely, the idea of marrying these two, started keeping me up at night. I used to think about how I can do it, because I wanted to be different from what was happening around me. And a lot of the art which was called modern, at least by Indian artists, didn't look very modern to me. I think it was still rooted in the times of F.N. Souza, maybe. He was the one person I saw a lot of modern artists inspired by. I could also see traces of other artists in what is called modern. I did not see a truly original voice in the art in this space in particular. And since I was working with graphics in Infosys, so there was this game I was developing while I was there and working on a technology called Silverlight. And it had beautiful, animations, and you could work on digital movie making. So that is where I started doing a little bit of work. And I realized that I should take this reasonable amount of talent which I have for computer graphics and utilize it to take my painting to a different level, because I always felt like I was slightly wanting as a painter and slightly wanting as a photographer. But what if we marry the two and try and create something beautiful? And fortunately, in that conjunction, I found my calling. And perhaps that discovery is the reason I decided to take that risk and leave my job and become a full-time artist. So yeah, and digitization, I think going digital is not necessarily modern because we have gone digital long ago, but definitely fine-tuning how graphics work, understanding how graphics work, and giving them your own definition, because I believe there is a lot of scope for artistic work even on a computer system. So I have always believed that when an artist sits in front of a photograph, even in post-processing or editing, or for that matter, when an editor edits a film or a movie well, then the final product is so different. So I thought that maybe I should combine these talents, try my best, and fortunately I found some good people along the way. And I must say that in all the answers I've given so far, a lot of the credit which I have taken is shared by the people around me. People have been kind to me. They've helped me in this journey. And I'm glad you're asking me these questions, because this is perhaps the first time I have an opportunity to open up and maybe, give something back to them.
Wow. So I was looking at your work, and one or two in particular deserve very, very close analysis. One is, of course, the branch that um, I would like to talk about. And the other, I don't know whether you've given them the names that I'm using, but the other was what looked to me like a wave in the sea. So can we look at those stills and then talk about those one at a time?
Absolutely. So I guess this is the wave you're
Okay.
talking about.
Yes. I see in it a momentum.
Mm-hmm.
It's as though I'm seeing a freeze frame in a film, and it's been left in suspension.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the energy of it that you've been able to capture.
Mm-hmm.
It is still, energy can never be held still, but there is in it both the stillness as well as the momentum. And I don't know how you achieved it. I mean, I am fascinated by it. I wish I could look at it in its original rather than its digital form. But would you like to talk about the method that you use, if you don't mind sharing your secrets, or in a way that would shed light on um, the artistry involved?
Well, I think that a lot of the work which people identify with is deeply emotional. And this work in particular, out of the ones you have seen, is very close to my heart. And the reason is that this is built out of loss. I think the energy you talk about is frustration. I made this soon after I lost my uncle, my dad's eldest brother. His name was Pramod. He was a poet. And I was collaborating with him on a series of works. And if you look at this carefully, the work, you'll see that, there are some leaf-like structures jutting out here and there.
Yeah.
And there is the theme which I was working with him on, I was collaborating with him as an artist, was growth. And so he was writing poetry and I was creating these artworks for him. And then he suddenly was no longer around. And so there was this tremendous frustration within me. I picked up these color pens and I made something. And this was not originally a swirl, but after I finished off the work, using the pens and, I looked at it, I thought that this is not representative of the person I was collaborating with at all. This is more my frustration, how I have felt about losing him. And maybe to, give it a certain grace, a certain dignity, I need to digitize it. So that is where the swirl, which is a common practice in digital artwork, comes in. So that was added in the digitization process. So that is why there is this energy to it. That is why it looks like a wave. And I think the freeze frame is something you spoke about, and that is completely intentional because there are certain things, certain people, certain moments you don't want to let go of. So, losing my uncle, who was in many ways the reason I started writing, was a very major loss in life. And yeah, so that is where this artwork began. And I think the final shape it took is perhaps because of the grace he had in him as a person. So it's a story of loss more than anything else. But so I wanted to freeze those memories. I wanted to have them with me forever. And whenever I look at this piece, I think of him and I remember him very fondly.
Okay. And I would say that, modernity almost always asks us to go back, whether in grief or loss or nostalgia, or even a celebration of a past time. I mean, it's not always tragic. It asks us to go back, and then it takes a form that goes forward. I call this the spiral movement. So in my teaching, I often, my students know, okay, she's arriving at the point where she talk about the spiral, to go back and then to move forward.
And so that is how I have envisaged it. So I think that is perhaps the best title ever, because I honestly never give titles to my abstract work.
Yeah.
I always want the person looking at them to have their own interpretation. One of the beautiful things about modernity is that you can have so many perspectives to it.
Yes, yes, yes. The abstraction of it leaves lots of room for interpretation and finding meaning wherever the viewer or the audience chooses to locate herself. So for me, this idea of the wave, and of course we know that within every wave there are infinite more waves. So a big wave is made up of small waves, and there is a spiral movement within each little wave, which makes up the big wave. So this is how I found my meaning in your work. The other very interesting piece that I want to talk about, let's call it the branch. I know that it is a very important piece for you because it was featured in a very, very important forum on NDTV in their art portal called Mohato in 2016. And that you were featured among such luminaries as M.F. Hussain, Syed Haider Raza, Dinkar Chadav, and now the star Maanas Lal. So in the oeuvre of modernity, let's say if we were to trace it from M.F. Hussain onwards, you've clearly found a spot. So talk to me about what was going through your mind. I don't want to ask you to explain it. It's not fair to ask an artist to explain his work. But tell me, as you said in the previous one, it was the tragic death of your uncle. what was the backdrop or what was surrounding you when you created this work?
So the backdrop of this was actually the divisions I saw in society at the time, and I I feel like 2016 was perhaps in many ways the beginning of a time when we started becoming more and more divided. Um, I know that the political shift perhaps took place in 2014, but then it takes time for maybe even governments to come into their own, and also people to maybe start understanding ideas slightly differently. So at least in my mind as an artist, I saw a quantum shift in how people treated each other, and that is why there are these colors, and I want to represent them as colors which can come together and create something beautiful, because it was deeply hurtful to see people fighting people. That is how I have always seen it. I don't really care about who belongs to which religion, which caste, which region. I couldn't care less, really. In fact, I think the world shouldn't care less about this. They should absolutely shun the ideas of division. So that is why this was born. And the element which I think brings all of us together is the element of nature. The beauty of nature is everywhere. It's omnipresent. And so maybe calling it a branches fair, because that was perhaps a slight tip of the hat to nature, and the way nature will eventually end up bringing us together, because we are very caught up in our times, and I feel like we give a lot of importance to this period of time which we live through. We think that we are going to redefine everything happening around us, but the fact is that human existence has been so short as compared to the time the earth has been around, and so many species have come before us, so many will come after us. We inhabit a very small space of time, and the fact that we are making it tragic hurts me. But I also know that there is hope in the fact that nature does correct the balance eventually in one way or the other. So that is what I was trying to depict through this, and that was my state of mind. So the first step to this painting was actually coming up with the colors which I wanted to be there in the painting. I'll just put it up on the screen again.
Sure.
So if you see, there are a lot of shades of green, there are shades of saffron, there are shades of yellow, and then there are some neutral colors. Because I think that one group of people who do not get enough space in art is the atheists. And I think it's time for them to also have a certain amount of space in the dialogue of how art should be perceived. And this was an effort to show that we must coexist, we must understand each other and come together like the leaves come together on the branches of a tree. How the fall colors look so good, even though they vary in hue. The hue varies from one leaf to the other, but the final impact on the viewer is so incredible. That this was picked up and displayed alongside these artists is something I still can't believe. And my dad came running to me. I was in a different room, and he said, "Did you see this collection?" And I knew that I was going to get a feature in the exhibition, but then he showed me the 4 names on display, and I saw that promotion, and I was stunned. I just couldn't believe it. And because I'd grown up seeing those paintings, I immediately knew who the people were. He did not tell me who the artists were. I saw them and I knew it was Zenza, because they have a language of their own, right? That's why they are so great. And then I eventually learned about Dinkar Jadhav too. And so there was a beautiful horse by Dinkar Jadhav. And then there was a painting from the Bindu series of S.H. Raza, an iconic series. And then there were Hussain Saab's horses. And then there was this. So to have been featured alongside these people, it was an honor. And also maybe the first time I realized how I should price my work, because NDTV priced my work at a place which I had never imagined in my life. So maybe the art world really opened up to me after this moment. And this artwork in that sense is truly special. And maybe this is the first time I'm talking about it so openly. But the bliss of feeling understood and being put in alongside other modern artists who I think have contributed a lot to the art form in general. was a massive privilege. And I still think I scarcely deserve that honor, but I am glad it happened.
Um, I'll say something as a curator because I've worked for a long time as a curator. So when a curator has to decide what gets included and what doesn't get included, because after all, not everything can be exhibited. There are, constraints. The curator thinks about what will exhibiting Manas Lal next to Raza add to Raza, and what will Raza add to Manas Lal, and vice versa. So it's a combination of, let's say, all four. How do they come together, and how do they shed light on each other? How do they add value to each other, which is what makes for a great exhibition. So clearly, I don't know about Dinkar Jadhav, what his age is, but Hussain and Raza are no more. It's important. It was perhaps important for the curator to start to sketch a line and bring it up to the present. And so it's very important to include somebody young, fresh, still forming, who makes the connection between the people who are dead and the people who are alive. So if I go to see an exhibition and it's curated with these four artists, I will naturally become curious about, okay, what are the cross currents between these people? Why have they been curated together? And so I only found out just now that you were featured with these artists. But as I was saying, my instinct was correct that you are on the cutting edge. You're where these people left off. So even if we are to sort of return to M.F. Hussain, we must return from where we are now, because that's the only place we can be, present, right? So the now of the exhibition in 2016, the now of this conversation in 2022 are very important to do a retrospective through the prism of this very young artist, that is Maanas Lal. You see, so that's why, I mean, it's no accident that of the visual artists, the first one that I'm talking to is this young man. And I'm trying to look back, but also look forward, because and I'm not the only one, I'm very concerned about how modernity has become arrested in the Indian context. I don't see very many impulses that make me think about the present through the artistic lens and make me hopeful about the future. Perhaps this is my cynicism, but looking at young artists and young poets who are compensating for my age and saying, take my hand and come forward, is very, very exciting. So I think that modernity should have a taste of optimism, should have a taste of idealism, should have a taste of hope. And even though in this work of art of yours, where the colors on the branch, they are kind of fading, they're not in focus.
Yeah.
They don't get synced in. There is a dissonance about it. I very much want to grab onto the dissonance, and yet hope that somehow I will be able to fine tune it. If I just focus the lens well enough, it will come into sharp. And so that's all that I'm gathering.
I'm very glad you said this, because I love it when people want to change something. I've often seen I've seen one or two people try and almost reach out for a painting of mine and try and say, we could have changed this a bit. And, and that is what I love. I think evoking that emotion in somebody. And
Yeah.
in a very opposite sense, I was a kid when 9/11 happened and the towers were coming down. And when I saw them coming down, my first instinct as a human being was to grab them. And it sounds very funny, right? But they were falling on TV. And I almost lunged forward to grab the falling twin towers.
Yeah.
And there are certain things you want to change, which you can't change, but you know something about this happening. And so to be able to create that impulse, I think that was a visual which is extremely powerful, because obviously it was happening in reality.
Yeah.
But to evoke that sense in someone is I think most gratifying as an artist.
Yeah. And I'm very glad that you're able to capture that dissonance. It's not an accidental dissonance. It is, I want to say, an intentional dissonance. But you are hoping, whether that dissonance is of a social kind or a political kind or a psychological kind or the dissonance of disease or death or regression, I might say, in our political landscape. That's very difficult to capture. And as you said, the instinct is for everybody to say, "Bhaiya zara iska focus theek kar dena. Focus mein nahi. Focus mein nahi. Focus." So as a film person, we are used to asking for things in the sharpest focus, without realizing that sometimes the lack of focus, or what I'm calling dissonance, has an artistic intent to it, and that is laudable. We'll take a pause. Let's switch gears, and I want to talk about your writing. I read some of the short pieces, and the one that really captured my attention was this piece where the persona is of a fetus in formation, and the fetus has a voice and a consciousness and a humanity, even as it has not been born yet. I found that moment of conception and that starting point of the narrative as in vitro or in utero to be just so brilliant. And then the in utero fetus identifies as a girl child. And then the girl child is born, and then the girl child is prematurely or almost immediately upon her birth buried alive. And a lot has been written about the abortion of girl fetuses, the so-called miscarriage of girl fetuses, and then, of course, the very early murder of the girl child in a society where the girl child is not valued. And this to me is also personal because I am one of two daughters, and my parents didn't have a son. A loss that has never occurred to me, but I know that my mother suffered greatly for being unable to produce a live male child. So this story of what sex selection or wanting a boy child or valuing the boy child or punishing the girl child or murdering the girl child is a story that's been told many times. We are almost numb to it. But what I really appreciated in your writing was this narrative point of view of the unborn, but vocal, thinking, feeling um, girl fetus. Um, and I know that you're a boy or a man. Tell me, what's your connection to this experience, besides, of course, the horror and inhumanity?
Well, the realization that we are living in an unequal society dawned upon me very early in life. I used to see how the batchmates, the girls in my batch, in my class are treated. And then when you go beyond that and you talk about the gender spectrum, that debate never even happened. And so I believe that even when this piece was written, I had a literally trivial understanding of the gender spectrum, but I did understand how unjust society is to women. People try and tell me that things have changed over a period of time. But I see the change as, way too slow and way too little. And I think the acceptance that we are deeply patriarchal is something which has to be there in every thinking, feeling, kind, good person. Men and women alike. I think there are no exceptions to this rule. All of us need to understand that the loss of a life is irreparable. It's the most tragic loss. And to end a life because, because of gender is as cruel as things can get. I don't know how people actually get to that stage. And I know that, this topic has been approached and it's usually a news report. And I wanted to give it an emotional, touch. And I knew the only way to do it is to try and somehow get into the unborn feet of a fetus. And it was almost impossible for me to do because women have this very special dimension of, feeling a certain way, understanding the world a certain way, which I do not have. But the best I could have done was maybe tried. And, the kind of response I received to this piece, the number of people who said that they cried or had a lump in their throat or, and some stopped reading midway. I don't think I've received that kind of response for any piece I've ever written. And this really made a lot of people think. And I know for a fact that there are people in my extended family whose mindset changed after reading this. And I think that was a big victory for this piece because it was written from the perspective of the fetus, but this was also a commentary on how we treat women in general. And I think we have a very long way to go in, becoming equal, achieving any kind of parity, and an even longer way to go when it comes to understanding the gender spectrum, LGBTQ plus rights. All this is so secondary in a modern world. Coming back to the theme of modernity, it's deeply hurtful. And so that sense of hurt is something I tried to project in this piece. And this was the one time when my editor, usually, she takes she publishes the piece or, makes a few tweaks here and there and puts it out. She wrote a mail to me saying that I'm, feeling very emotional. This is a wonderful piece and I don't know how to edit it. So, yeah, it was one of those pieces which I think it still haunts me sometimes because I think I put myself through too much that week to come up with this piece. Feeling those emotions was, I felt very guilty because I felt like I had ignored these things for way too long. And maybe seeing society the way it was, the patriarchy was so inherent in me as a person that it took a lot of time to grow out of it and understand how unjust I have been to women around me. I used to consider it a routine thing for women to make sacrifices. And now I see it as something which is just unacceptable. And why should the woman always be the one to, bear the burden of the world? And this is truly unfortunate. So
Um,
yes, that's how I
uh,
feel from my greetings.
I'm so glad that you took my question, which had some undercurrents of, let's say, the gender binary, and you took it to the next level of, the gender spectrum, because indeed that is one of the absolute unspoken taboos, unspoken realities of society in India as I encounter it. I made the comment in a class once about how Gandhi was exploring the feminine aspects of his personality in a fairly intimate relationship with another man, and the kind of response that I got was, pin drop silence and hostility. I mean, the class basically thought that I had uttered something so sacrilegious that they wouldn't even respond to it. And 2 years later, I had the occasion to explain that I was not saying somebody was gay. I was saying somebody was exploring the full spectrum of his gender positions, uh, and and femininity being associated with gentleness and yet assertiveness. So, Gandhi's moral assertiveness came out of a feminine position rather than a patriarchal, masculine, aggressive position. But it took me 2 years to work this out with that set of students, because what I said at first was absolutely not understood. We've gone well past our conversation time, and we could go on for a much, much longer time. I want to thank you for a very stimulating conversation. Thank you so much. I wish you all the
Thank
very
you so much,
best.
Poonam Aunty.
Yeah.
This was absolutely a privilege. And I look forward to more such conversations. And a big congratulations to the entire family at XENA. I think all of you are doing wonderful work. And I encourage all those watching this to subscribe to the channel and also to watch the other episodes. I'm sure.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the plug-in. We're delighted. Goodbye.
You're welcome. Goodbye.